So this is your video lecture slash lab for the first part of Socet, the one we were going to do last week but didn't quite get to work out. Now what we're going to do is work our way through the software a little bit. I want you to look around and see the things that we're seeing, and I want you to do this in real time so that you can see how this stuff goes. We're not actually going to do any analysis or bring in any data, but I want you to work yourself through these steps, and this will show you where some of these features are and what some of these things that the software can do. Now, the next video, the one that you'll watch after this one, has an actual lab component, and it'll be very similar, other than it'll actually ask you to do things. But for this, we're just going to look at some of the capabilities. So when you start up Socet, you're going to have to go in through Citrix to get to it. It sort of opens up into two primary components: the workspace manager and the multi-port, and then there's the preferences. The workspace manager is where everything starts. As you add data into the workspace manager, if you double click on that data, it opens up the multi-port, which is the actual portal where the work is done on the data itself. And then the preferences are where you go in and make some adjustments and set some things up, like where things are stored and whatnot. So when we go to make those changes, we do that in the preferences. And basically, if you're in the workspace manager, just go under view and down to preferences, and you can find it right there. And then open up your multi-port. I believe you do that from file, I think. If you have data in, it's pretty easy to find. You can just double click it. But from the multi-port, you can also see that the preferences are under the file menu there as well. And in this, the three things that you're going to look at changing are the various temporary directories. And one is where you store temporary stuff, one is where you store permanent stuff, and one is where you store stuff that you want to try to load into the software. And we're not going to do anything with this necessarily. The software is designed to work off of large geodatabases full of information, and in that setting, the ability to set all these different directories and for them to work seamlessly is a real plus. But for our purposes and just simply learning how to function a little bit within the software, it's not really necessary. Okay, so next we're going to look at the next slide. This is your workspace manager. So this is the basic thing that pops up. And it's got a couple of different panels. One on the top left is your data view. The one in the middle is the Windows view. The one on the right is a preview plane. The one on the bottom is a map view. When you load data into Socet, it's pretty straightforward. You just go to the file, open folder, and then find the thing you want, click on it, and drag it over and drop it into the into your multi-port, and it loads right in. Now to display a single image is pretty straightforward. You just double click on that image in the workspace manager and it opens it right up in a multi-port, or you can right click and select open multi-port and that'll do it, or you can drag the image from the data viewer to the Windows view. Now if you have multiple images to display, so maybe you want to look at two different things, you can just select Control and Shift and right click and select open, and it'll open all in one panel. It can do separate panels or separate multi-ports, and lots of different options. The thing you need to remember is that in the workspace manager data view, if you hit Shift and then click open separate panels, you can actually open up to 4 different images at the same time. So that allows you to look at things at different perspectives. Let's talk just a little bit about the terminology of the ribbons. The main tabs are the things that are always visible. The contextual tabs are the ones in purple. Those are the ones that only display when certain data types are loaded. You also have groups. Groups are the ones over here sort of wrapped up in the green. They're related functions or buttons that are grouped together to make it easier to find. So things that you would use similarly or together. Then there's just regular old buttons. These are used to perform tasks or begin a process. And then there's various dialog box launchers, and so in a lot of these groups or whatever, you'll see like there next to the linked panes text, there's a a little box there. It's got the light blue box around it. You click on that, it gives you some dialogue. It tells you more about what's going on. So we also have these super tooltips. And they're not super tool tips, they're super tooltips. And so what happens is if you hold your mouse and hover over top of a button on one of the ribbons, it gives you a detailed explanation of what that tool does. This can be very useful for trying to figure out, what some of the stuff actually does. You can turn this on and off, but I don't know why you would want it turned off unless you become that familiar with the software. As far as navigation, navigation stuff is relatively straightforward. From the Home tab, there's the Pan group, the Zoom group, and the Rotate group, and you can see that they're for moving data around, zooming in and out, or rotating around. It also has a function to add bookmarks where you can make note of where a place is and store a 2D or 3D location value for that, so that you can later on go back to that location without having to scramble around and look for it. They also have a quick access toolbar, and the unique thing is this is fully customizable, and it also allows you to place a lot of the tools that you use a lot there to where you're going to easily find them. And this works with this concept of a workflow, which is sort of industry speak for order of operations or instructions, if you will, for a particular task. And so a workflow is the various things and steps that you need to do to complete some process. And basically a customizable toolbar allows you to, or a quick access toolbar allows you to put in the tools that are necessary for a particular workflow. And that makes it easier to train new people, because you can literally make sure that all the tools that they're going to need are in that quick access toolbar. Give you a little bit more about it. You can actually set these up and save different ones. And so you could have different layouts for different tasks and simply open up the task that you need for whatever it is you're doing. We also have a pretty robust undo history. And so you can go back as far as you want with the undo. Now, if you don't want to keep that much information, you can go into preferences under the general sections and set this up to not keep as many options, but it's nice to know that you can have that. Same way with the File tab, you can do a lot of really common functions like opening, saving, data, the various options about how you save, printing, preferences, and closing up panels can all be accomplished from the File tab. And I want to talk a little bit about ribbon key types. Ribbon key types allow you to navigate the ribbon and access tools using the keyboard rather than the mouse. And so basically what happens is you have these hotkeys where you can hit certain keys or certain combinations, and it'll bring some of the actions in, allowing you to do more without using your mouse. So I talked a little bit about the multi-port. I want to explain that just a little bit further. The multi-port basically is sort of like the program, actually. The tools are available in the View tab and allows you to use different things and open up new ones. A new multi-port is always blank. You can clone a multi-port, which basically becomes a duplicate. You can have separate ones, which allow you to split data currently displayed. Lots of different ways you can separate a multi-port rather than not have separate multi-ports. But you get the idea. And we also have these mini toolbars. They're available in the multi-port. You can simply right-click on the panel. It can be a quick and easy way to access some of the functions. It makes a lot of the things that you're going to use more accessible. We look at tab panels versus split panels. When you have in a split panel, it allows you to look at different images simultaneously. In the tab panel, it opens images in different tabs in the same multi-port. So basically it's like, do you want to look at two things at the same time, or do you want to have multiple things in there but only look at one of them at a time? And just like a lot of other GIS systems, you also have the ability to change your workspace coordinate system. From the file menu, you can literally go into properties and workspace properties and just click modify and work through that process of changing the coordinate system overall for the entire workspace. You can also go in and set the preferences and the default for what it would be, and that can be useful. As far as the actual panel properties, you can change the coordinate system of a single panel to the panel properties on the View tab, and then just go to the panel properties and modify it just like you would with most other softwares. And you can convert coordinates. So maybe you've got coordinates in there in one system, but you need to export them into something else so that you can use them differently. You can literally go to your workspace and tools and select convert coordinates, or you can access it from the geospatial tab in the multiport. Either way, it'll allow you to take data that's in one system and convert it to something else, and you can literally see there in real time how in this example we're in WGS 84 and we're going to switch it to a different the military grid system, and you go from having angular degrees on the left to non-angular projected coordinates on the right, and you can literally take those XYs and just convert it right there. There's a lot of functionality that is built into this software that we will explore, and some we won't. But for now, I want to just point out what some of these things are and what they can do. One of them is called ortho on the fly. And so, ortho rectifying an image is not always an easy task, but with Socet it is. It's a single click. And basically the image pixels are stretched and warped to make them appear as if they're all taken from nadir. So it makes every pixel looking straight down. Now, how do you do this? You just go into display, and if you have an oblique image in a multiport, from the visualization tab, the ortho rectify group, you click ortho on the fly, and kaboom. And I'll give you the heads up on this. You gotta have terrain. If you don't have an elevation model underneath this, it's just not going to work. So overviews are also something else. An overview displays the entire active image. They can be opened in a separate panel, a separate multiport, depending on how you have your preferences set. Small overviews can be displayed like picture-in-picture. A lot of times they control the regional control box, so you can move and resize things. And overview tab appears with various tools and allows you to look at the overall functionality. Some other tools that might come up from time to time is things like the basic draw tools. And so if you click the text button, for example, on the image upper left, you get some options. And as you go through that whole thing, you can annotate an image. You can click on the polygon button and draw polygons. You can add markers. Lots of different things that you can do in drawing. And so take a little bit of time and wander around and see what some of those buttons look like and what they can do. You can also save things as shapefiles. Now I want to point out that while products like ArcMap and ArcPro are generally geared towards vector data, Socet is geared much more exclusively towards raster data, but it recognizes the fact that oftentimes you have to use vector data as well, and so it has the ability to save things as shapefiles and to deal with vector data as well. So some of the tools that are in here that have been designed to allow for quick access of information. Let's look at this bracket tool. This is part of the mensuration process, in other words, the measuring of things. And so the bracket tool basically just allows you to click the two ends of something and it'll tell you just how far apart those two things are. No more complicated than that. Similarly, they have a device button there for measuring the height of objects. And so if it has all the proper image information and it's at an oblique angle, it can figure out how tall something is, and not doing a whole lot of complicated stuff. It's literally clicking at the bottom and clicking at the top, and it will tell you the rest. Polyline and polygon measurement tools, again, just other ways of identifying things that you want to get quick, accurate measurements from right away. It also has some functionality built in to work specifically with GPS. And that can be quite useful. A lot of times hooking up a GPS unit to a GIS system is not as easy as what you would think. GPS tools allow you to identify waypoints and plan routes, and Socet has that ability to link up with all Garmin devices, and so there's a lot of utility there. You can also do waypoints and routes and save them and assign them and add them in different ways. You also have the capacity to look at some basic enhancements, and so we'll look at a few of them. These are made to images, and basically they have sliders on the Enhance tab to do things like adjust the brightness or the contrast or the gamma or the transparency or whatever it might be from one thing to another. You can move these sliders around to make the image more palatable or more understandable. And you can reset an individual slider simply by clicking the reset button next to that slider, and it'll go right back to where it should have been, or where it was initially. And you can reset all of them simply by clicking the reset enhancements button in the processing chain, and that just it basically is an undo button for all the changes that you've made there playing around with those things. You can also identify areas of interests, and areas of interests have a lot of different functions, and we're going to look at a couple here. So the first one is this idea of chipping. If you're not familiar with chipping, sometimes along the edges of raster images all the color planes may not line up, or they may not line up to the grid evenly. You might have some areas that are void of information, have zero or bare empty space or something like that. Chipping, basically you draw a box inside your existing raster, and it creates a synced up, synchronized sort of cut along that line so that everything matches to that point. You can also take snapshots, and then there's these localized tools that do things like zoom, for triangulation, various enhancements, generating ortho stuff, and even terrain. Now, I talked about how sometimes you have to chip these things because of the boundaries. Here we have void pixels is what they call them. Void pixels is this no data area that's around them. So when you're trying to make, for example, a mosaic and you've got multiple images, the problem becomes some of the images, like you see in the top, where the void pixels are there as part of one image, they show up on top of another. And what void pixels does, when you turn this on, it takes those values of nothing and makes them basically transparent, so that when you do the mosaic, you can actually see one data set laid over top of the other set, and you don't see the black areas along the edges of the overlap. Let's see what else we got. So you can do a couple of different things as far as aligning your images. One's called a multicolor compare, and one's called a glove align. The multicolor compare is used to detect changes between co-registered images. So you got two images in the same place, you register them together. If they're both exactly the same, then the red image and the blue image will all line up. But if you see a plane that's red or you see a plane that's blue, then it's an indication that it was in one image and not the other. The glove align is very similar to what you might expect. It allows you to move, scale, rotate an image to align it. And it works when zoomed in or zoomed out, and basically just allows you to grab it and move it till it fits. Pan sharpening is something else. A lot of times with multispectral data, you'll have, for example, red, blue, green, near infrared, and you might have a panchromatic band. Well, if you've got the panchromatic band, it allows you to take your multispectral data and enhance it using the panchromatic layer. And basically the panchromatic is typically at a higher resolution, and so the software uses it to generate a higher detail level raster data set than what you would have otherwise. So how do we align images? Well, Socet has 5 methods to make this happen. The first one is the auto align. It's a quick affine registration. It uses automatic tie points from within the panel display, and it fixes everything up. You can glove align, which is basically manual, but you really can't save those. And you can do the quick align, which is an image to image only 2D transformation. You have to pick out 1 to 3 tie points, and again, these results can't be saved either. Now, registration is a little different. It's basically registering the image to the ground. 2D or 3D polynomial solutions, it requires somewhere, you have to have at least 3, but to 10 tie points or ground control points. Then you have triangulation, which they, in their wisdom, chose not to tell you about. And image to ground, rigorous sensor models, and all this stuff that goes into that. So there's lots of different ways to align your images, all about getting you the best possible registration of your raster imagery. So what is registration? Well, registration provides for image-to-image registration or image to ground. You can save it for future use. It does not update the initial sensor model. Basically, it computes a simple 3D polynomial sensor model for the image, and it does something called rubber sheeting. So imagine that the layer you're looking at, instead of a printed paper map, is printed on rubber. It's just how you bend it and stretch it to make it fit. If you do image to ground, you got to have control points, and it provides the capability to register imagery without supporting data. Image to image requires at least 1 image with a good supporting data, so you have to have some sort of master data set that you can go from. If one thing has all the stuff that you need, you can simply identify common places and transfer a lot of that ability to the other image. How do you select points? Well, you need to select points that are at ground level and will not move. Good things are like corners of sidewalks. The corner of a car would be bad. The roof of a tall building would be bad because it's not at ground level. And so if you register an entire image, you want to spread the points out, and you don't want to focus on a particular. When you're focusing on a particular area, you want to make sure that you select points that surround that area, and they should be evenly distributed but not linear. So that means you don't want to have them all in one line or one row, and you want to work your way around the area that matters, and you want to have points at fixed locations on the ground. Terrain analysis and visualization. There's also a lot of capacities in this. For example, you can take any image, and if you have a terrain file that goes with it, you can open it up in a multiport and do an all-in-one panel. If you have an auto TED, auto DTED loaded up in there, it'll work through this and basically create this visualization, this 3D visualization of what you're doing straight away for you. So that kind of concludes sort of my short review, and so I'm going to also attach the PDF called Essentials, and this is where most of these slides come from. What I want you to do next, and just be aware that the data that they're asking for does not exist. It is not loaded up in the software. It is proprietary and only available at the trainings that they do at their locations. So when it tells you to open up the such and such file in the such and such place, you don't have that and you can't find it. Don't look for it. It's not there. But what you can do is work your way through that PDF. If any of these sort of tools that I mentioned in this brief overview, if you find them interesting, go back and take a look at it. And what I want you guys to do primarily at this point is focus on the next set of slides, which I'll put up later in Canvas, and they're going to be looking at working with multispectral imagery in Socet, and then next week we'll look at some other stuff. Now I want to point out that is actually going to be a lab. There will be data. It may not be the data that it says in the lab, but I'll point out what you're supposed to use when the time comes, and you'll get a chance to go through and you'll get some idea of how you can process multispectral imagery in this, and how that compares favorably or not with some of the other softwares that we've used. So take a few minutes, play around a little bit with Socet, see what you can figure out, see what you like and what you don't like, and then after you spend maybe 10 or 15 minutes doing that, looking through the full set of slides. There's 230 slides instead of the 42 that I constructed here. Take a minute and look through that, and there's a lot of information in there, and see if you can make sense of something that matters to you. And hopefully when we start to do the multispectral image analysis later, this run through and the time you've spent just playing around the software, seeing what you can do with it, will be helpful. Now, if you're actually looking for data to use, I'm going to recommend you utilize the data from NV. NV data sets that we have previously. If you want to play around with some of this ortho stuff, for example, there is an ortho folder in the NV data folder that you copied in Citrix, and so why not use it? We're definitely going to use the multispectral that way, and if you want to use the hyperspectral stuff and tinker around with that too, you can. Just don't get too carried away with making any real substantive changes in the preferences, because you might end up making a permanent change that you don't want. So just avoid maybe making changes there, but otherwise have fun, explore the data a little bit, and see if you can make yourself a little bit familiar, and that should make it much easier when you come back later and do the final lab work for this week's segment based on the other set of slides. Good luck.